Welcome to the spring 2022 semester at Austin Community College and to a psychology course called Human Growth and Development, a course that I like to affectionately refer to as womb-to-tomb psychology because it's a study of human development from conception until death. I'm Dan Grangard. I'm the professor of this particular section of the course, and I look forward to working with you this semester. This is a study of lifespan development. We will be studying people at all the different ages and stages of life to see how they may have changed and see how they have remained the same. Because of that, I would like to kind of trace my own developmental history for you so that you can see where I'm coming from in teaching this course, in that I've worked with people throughout the age span, throughout the lifespan, that is, and I wanted to share some of those experiences with you. One of the first jobs I had in dealing with people, I suppose, was when I was in high school. I was a youth worker at the YMCA. I grew up in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, which is a city of about 45,000. I think in the metro area, there's maybe 100,000. It's located halfway between Milwaukee and Green Bay. And I always like to say I was a personal trainer before there were such things as personal trainers. So I've always been kind of a fitness buff. I did that throughout high school. And then the summer before I started college, I was a teacher's aide at an elementary school. I assisted in teaching science to students in grades 2 through 6. I went to college at Baylor University. I was looking forward to getting out of the cold weather up there in Wisconsin in the winters. And I hung around Baylor for 9 years, well, really 8.5. And I earned 3 degrees. I have a bachelor's degree with a major in sociology and a minor in psychology. And then I have a Master of Science degree with a major in educational psychology, and then I have a doctorate with a major in educational psychology and a minor in elementary education. So that's my academic background, if you will. The summer between my freshman and sophomore years of college, I went back to Wisconsin, and I spent the summer working as a playground director. Throughout the city of Fond du Lac, they had playgrounds. Some were at parks, some were at school grounds. And they were open from 9 in the morning till 9 at night. And so I was the main playground director at probably the largest one in the city. At any one time, we had as many as 600 children and adolescents involved in different play activities. We organized softball teams, and we had track meets and competitions with the other playgrounds throughout the city, and so on. We had handicrafts, etc., etc. And so I did that summer. My sophomore year at Baylor, I signed up for a course, a social work course, where you got credit for community volunteer work. And I ended up, a lot of this is tied into my background in recreation. I ended up as the physical education teacher for an entire school that was nothing but kindergarten classes in the Waco Independent School District. Back in those days, kindergarten was only for low-income children. So these were all children who came from low-income families, and I was the PE teacher. They liked what I did because then in the summer, I stayed in Waco that second summer of college, and they actually paid me to continue being the physical education teacher for this entire school that was just a kindergarten. When I was working on my master's degree in educational psychology, I landed a teaching assistantship where, and because of my background, they made me the assistant to the head of the early childhood program at Baylor. And so I assisted in teaching psychology courses to kindergarten teachers. When I was working on my doctorate then in educational psychology, I taught undergraduate courses very similar to this class. It was a course called Educational Psychology for elementary teachers, and I taught that class for 2.5 years while I was working on my doctorate. Because I had all this experience with young children, and because I had been the graduate assistant to the head of the early childhood program, it was suggested to me that I write my dissertation on the roles of paraprofessionals in kindergartens. And so that's what I did. And when you start grad school, you think you're going to do some earth-shattering study that will revolutionize the field. And in the end, you do whatever the chair of your committee asks you to. So that's what I did my dissertation on. My first real position as a psychologist after graduate school, I was a school psychologist for the Education Service Center Region 12, which has its headquarters in Waco. I was the only doctoral level school psychologist serving 81 school districts in 12 counties, if you can imagine that. I'd get up in the morning and I'd drive 50 or 60 miles out to some little town and give IQ tests to a couple of kids and drive back. That wasn't my idea of being a psychologist. While I was an undergraduate, that second summer that I stayed in Waco, I shared an apartment with a guy from Austin, and one weekend we were out of food and out of money, and he suggested that that would be a good time to go visit his parents. So came down here, fell in love with Austin, said, boy, that's where I'd like to live someday. And I eventually, after a year of being a school psychologist in Waco, that next year I landed a position as a school psychologist for the Austin Independent School District. And I did that for the next 8 years. Every year I was assigned to 3 or 4 school buildings, typically a high school, middle school, and an elementary school. Spent 2 years at LBJ High School and 5 at Austin High. Most of the schools I worked in were on the east side of town and the southwest side of town. Although I did spend several years at Murkison Middle School, which is in Northwest Hills. The only school I survived at the whole 8 years was Oak Hill Elementary. And as I always like to say, I survived 3 different principals. When you're a school psychologist, everybody's your boss. not just the head of psychological services for the district. Every school building you walk in, the principal's your boss, and the teachers all try to boss you around. And so anyway, I survived at Oak Hill Elementary 8 years. All psychologists reach a point, though, where they say, I want to do things my way. And they decide to start a private practice, and that's exactly what I did. And you know, the neat thing about being a school psychologist is you get the summers off. And so during the school year, I would work for the school from 8 till about 4, and then I would go to my private office and work the early evening hours, and Saturdays a lot of times in the mornings. But then in the summer, I could devote all my time to my private practice. Initially, I actually did my private practice. I had a friend who was an obstetrician, gynecologist, and he let me use his office rent-free in the evenings. So I started a private practice in a gynecology office, which was an interesting experience. Eventually, there was a student at Austin High who was angry because although she was going to graduate in the top 10 in her class, she wasn't going to be the valedictorian because she hadn't taken enough AP classes and honors classes and things like that. So she got angry and started sending death threats to the principal and the associate principal and people like that. The associate principal's first name was Jack, and she sent him a poem that said, "Death be nimble, death be quick, forget the candlestick, kill Jack." And you always knew it was from her because she had her own little logo that she always put on the bottom of everything she did. When you do that, you get to meet the school psychologist. And as you probably already predicted, this young lady already had a psychiatrist on the outside. I started consulting with him. He and I really hit it off, and he suggested I move my private practice into his office, which I did. It was located in Medical Science Center over on 38th Street. And of course, so, you know, I'd work for the schools during the day, and then I'd go to the private office in the evenings. When summer came, I was, you know, doing that full time, and he was giving me a lot of referrals for psychological testing, and it seemed like if I hit it off with the child or adolescent I was working with, he, by the way, was the only child and adolescent psychiatrist on both the city and state's health plan. So we had a lot of business. And it seems like if I hit it off with the patient, he would say, why don't you go ahead and do the therapy too? And a lot of psychiatrists are more into prescribing medications than they are into doing therapy. So suddenly I was quite busy. The school district offered me a promotion, but I would have had to give up my private practice, and I didn't want to do that. So I resigned from the school district, going into full-time private practice. After a couple of years, though, the psychiatrist, who loved being a psychiatrist, but he hated dealing with insurance companies, decided that he was going to move to Dallas, where he had been offered a position as chief psychiatrist for the adolescent unit at a psychiatric hospital. And he tried to get me to go to Dallas with him, but I wanted to stay in Austin. So I remained in private practice for a while. By the way, I forgot to mention that while I was a school psychologist, I supervised school psychology interns from the University of Texas at Austin and from Texas State University down in San Marcos. Well, after about a year of just practicing independently, there was a large psychiatric clinic in Dallas that decided to open a satellite clinic in Austin. And I ended up merging my private practice with that large clinic. I became chief psychologist, director of intern training, and director of testing. And the clinic was a very large operation. Had over 50 professionals working in it, about a half a dozen psychiatrists, half a dozen psychologists. There were clinical social workers, licensed professional counselors, nurses. The clinic was so big we had our own day hospital and our own 20-bed inpatient unit over at Shoal Creek Hospital. During this time, it was a 7-year period. Every other weekend, I led group psychotherapy in the hospital, and I did lots of testing. There were two psychiatrists that specialized in kids, and then most of the other ones mainly treated adults, but then there was one who specialized in geriatrics. And so I found myself working with the entire age span, everything from preschoolers to senior citizens. For example, I was doing a lot of dementia psychological assessments in the hospital and things like that. The clinic eventually got bought out by a chain of clinics that had their headquarters in California. They shut down the Austin clinic, which was having financial problems due to managed health care. I went back into private practice. I opened an office out in Westlake Hills, not far from Westlake High School. And about a year or two after I did that, an opportunity came along to start teaching classes at ACC, which I was really looking forward to doing. I had enjoyed teaching undergraduates at Baylor. And so when this opportunity came along to teach half-time at ACC and then do my private practice half-time, I jumped at the chance. After about a year or two, though, an opportunity also came along to teach courses at St. Edward's University. And so I got to the point where I was teaching like 3 classes at ACC, 3 or 4 at St. Ed's, and then trying to do my private practice on top of it all. And so I was kind of limited to doing my practice on Fridays. And then an opportunity came along to work at ACC full-time, half-time teaching, and then half-time counseling and advising students in what then was called the Office for Students with Disabilities. Now it's called Student Accessibility Services. So I enjoyed that immensely. And I guess it was in 2017, they were going to be remodeling the Rio Grande campuses, which is where I was working. And I was going to lose my office because it was going to take them a couple of years to do renovations. And so I retired from the counseling advising role and went back to just teaching at ACC. So that's kind of my professional history. Oh, by the way, I've got quite a few years experience as a father. I have 2 adult children, and I have 3 grandsons, ages 11, 6, and 6. Yeah. twin 6-year-olds, and they're all boys. So I've acquired a fair amount of experience as a grandparent. I mention all this stuff because everything we study, I back up with a real-life example of psychology in practice. You know, there are a lot of psychologists out there, professors and people like that, who are simply researchers and they've never really been clinicians. And they might write textbooks, and the books have examples that they heard about or they just made up. Everything we study, I will back up with a real life case study. And I think that will make the material especially meaningful to you. I always like to say that the course is especially well suited for people who want to pursue careers in the helping, healthcare, and education professions, and really for anyone who'd like to better understand people who are at a different stage in life than they are living. You know, how many of you have children? Those of you who don't, have you ever wondered why kids act certain ways in certain situations? Or maybe you have an aging parent or grandparent, and 10 or 15 minutes into a conversation with them, they start talking about something they already talked about. Have you ever wondered why that is? Well, this course will help you better understand those kinds of things. So let's get into it together and take a look at the syllabus. As far as course requirements are concerned, number one, read the textbook. Now this is an online class, and so I've put together what I call a tentative, or not a tentative, but a recommended course daily outline. I think I've set it up as if it's a Tuesday, Thursday class, mainly so that if you stay on pace, you shouldn't have any difficulty completing a course like this during the semester. And so, and the textbook, by the way, is The Developing Person Through the Lifespan, the latest 11th edition. It's by Kathleen Berger. It's a great book. I know Kathleen Berger. I've gotten together with her at a number of meetings and things like that. She's a professor at the Bronx Community College in New York City. She's very personable and a terrific teacher. And I think you'll find the book is excellent. Over the years, I've been hired by different publishers to review and edit various textbooks. And I've got to tell you, of all the ones that I've looked at in human growth and development, I think Kathleen Berger's is the best. And so I've stuck with it. I think you'll like the book. If you look at pages 4 and 5 of your syllabus, you'll see what topic I think it's good to study on what day and what date, and the corresponding chapter for that topic. You know, ideally, I would say read the chapter before you get into the topic. For each topic, I'll have PowerPoint lectures accompanied by auditory lectures. There'll be video clips, audio clips. I do all sorts of things. in terms of media coverage. But I think if you've got a little bit of background on a topic before you get into the work that I present, it will be helpful. So again, on pages 4 and 5, it talks about what topic to study by what date in order to remain on task. You know, and with an online class, it's easy to get behind. And so I would try and stick with the recommended daily outline if you can. When I was a student, I had a couple of pet peeves, and one of them was I wasn't very good at discerning when I read a textbook what the professor thought was important. You know, I would read a textbook and I'd highlight stuff in yellow and I'd underline some more stuff in red. I'd write stuff in the margins, take notes in the margins. I put little asterisks next to stuff I thought was especially interesting and important, and then none of that was on the test. That will never happen in here. What's emphasized in class will be emphasized on tests. And if you want to know what to focus your reading in the book on, study the learning objectives, which begin on page 5 for each chapter. In other words, before you read the chapter, read the learning objectives. And that way, when you're reading the chapter, if you want to know what I hoped you would zero in on, it's the stuff that's in the learning objectives. Anything else that'd be helpful to you, have at it. But if you wanted to know what I was hoping you'd get out of the chapter, the learning objectives, zero in on those things. Okay. Back to page 1. Successfully complete, go back to point number 2 on the course requirements, and that's regularly check the announcements on Blackboard. I would check the announcements at least every other day just to see. That's one of the ways that I would communicate with everyone is by posting announcements on Blackboard. Okay. Back to the front page, point number 4, successfully complete 4 examinations, and information about the tests begins on page 3. The tests will be multiple choice, true, false in format. There will also be a bonus essay question. There are no provisions for retests or extra credit. The tests are open notes, open book, and they're taken on Blackboard. Basically, you will have a week to complete a test from the day it is made available. And again, if you look at on page 4 and 5 of your recommended daily outline, the first test is scheduled for Thursday, February the 10th. So in other words, that's the day I will make it available to take. If you've been studying right along, like I would hope you would, you could just take it on that day. But if you're a little bit behind, you will have 1 week from the day it becomes available to have completed and submitted that test. So in test 1, it'll be available on February the 10th, and the following Thursday, February the 17th, you should have completed it by that time. Each test will have a bonus essay, which is an applied kind of question, and it's not extra credit. it's bonus points added onto your test score. So it's not like, well, I'm going to take the test and, oh, I need some more points, I'll do extra credit. That's not what it is. Because you should submit on the day that you finish the objective part of the test. That day you should submit to me, that in other words, email to me your response to the bonus essay for extra points should you choose to do that task. You can email the bonus essays to dgran, D-G-R-A-N, at austincc.edu. The deadline for the last test, and by the way, the last test is just test 4. It's not a comprehensive final, and it'll become available on Tuesday, May the 10th. And the day it's due is the last day of the semester, which is May 15th. Okay. Few more words about tests. I write my own test questions. I don't use test banks or something like that. Actually, I've written the test banks for a number of textbook publishers. I have an extensive background in test construction. I probably had at least a half a dozen courses of it in graduate school. So I write my own questions, and most of them are at the higher levels of testing. There's a thing that we use in education called Bloom's taxonomy, and we use this to write test questions. The first 3 levels of Bloom's taxonomy are knowledge, comprehension, and application. A knowledge level test question would be something like a definition or a fact, an agreed upon fact or something like that. A comprehension level question would be something like, can you pick out an example of something? An application level question, like the bonus essay, for example, is can you take what you've learned, what you've studied, and apply it to a situation? Most of my test questions are at the comprehension and application levels. So, it's not something you can just put off till the last minute and then look up the answers. So I would try and study consistently every chance that you get, rather than waiting till the last minute, even though it's open book, and thinking you can just look up answers. You can use the learning objectives in the course syllabus as study questions for the tests, but I will also post on Blackboard specific study questions for each test, and the review questions that I post actually come right out of the test. So that's one of the best things you can possibly study. Also, I will arrange an online live test review session on Blackboard Collaborate Ultra that you can come on and you can ask me questions. I can ask you questions. We can study together for a test. I always say, who better to study for a test with than the guy who wrote the questions? And hopefully I will remember. It always helps if a student in the study group reminds me to record those test review sessions. So, if you're working that night or something's going on in your life, you can go back and see what the rest of us talked about. Somebody please take it upon yourselves to remind me at the beginning of those sessions. I often get so involved in trying to make my camera work and my microphone work and everything else on my computer that, we get halfway into the session and somebody goes, "Are you recording this?" I go, uh-oh. So hopefully I've mended my ways this semester when it comes to that. You will always, after you finish a test, be able to see what your score is on Blackboard. Most of the tests have 50 questions. At the end of the week, when everybody should have completed the test, then I will post on Blackboard on the announcements page statistics for the class. And so, you can see how your score fits in with everybody else's. In general, I would say in this course, students do quite well. When I teach Intro to Psych, I tend to get a bell curve when it comes to test scores. In this course, it tends to be negatively skewed, and what I mean by that is there's more higher scores than there are lower scores, and that's because so many of the students in this course are trying to get into competitive healthcare type programs like nursing and dental hygiene and things like that. And so I think it tends to attract excellent students. It's rare that I come across a student who's not well prepared in a course like this. The other course requirement is that you read a book and write a book report over it. If you go back to page 1, point number 5, read a biography or autobiography or a book related to developmental psychology and write a book review. But because this is a course in a lifespan development, I think an autobiography really gets to a lot of the questions that you would want to ask, things that you would want to study about a person. And, it could be a biography or an autobiography about anybody, not just some psychologist or somebody like that. It could be your favorite rock musician or somebody, or some figure in history that you find fascinating, or somebody that nobody's ever heard of, but they've written a real meaningful autobiography about themselves. And then write up a book report about that. The book report, I've got samples of it at the end of the course syllabus that you can take a look at. Book reviews on biographies or autobiographies can be 2 pages, single space typed, and they should include a bibliographic entry, which is, the author's name, the title of the book, the year it was published, the name of the publisher, the city it was published in, that kind of thing. And then it should have sections highlighting life and career accomplishments, life setbacks and challenges. There is no person whose life has gone smoothly from beginning to end. If there was somebody like that, you wouldn't want to read their biography. Everybody's life has challenges to it. and it's interesting to read about life setbacks and challenges. And then there should be a section on lessons that are conveyed by the person's testimony, and then a section that involves your favorite snapshot of the person's life. And then a brief ecological analysis based on Bronfenbrenner's model, which we will be studying early on in the course, like next week. And then finally, your evaluation of the book. If you choose to read and write a report on a developmental psychology-related book, for example, maybe it's on Piaget's stages of cognitive development or something like that, or I've actually got a sample. You can't read this book, but there's a sample of a developmental psychology-related book at the end of the syllabus. It's called SOS Help for Parents. It's basically a classic book on use of the home token economy to deal with your children. If you choose a developmental psychology kind of book, then the report should be just one page, single space typed. You can play with the margins and everything else. And you can go down to about size 8 font if you need to. But basically, again, there will be a bibliographic entry, some information about the author. I want to know, how did this author become an authority on the topic? Where did they study? Where have they worked? And then, what was the thesis of the book? What were the main points that were made by the author? And then finally, an evaluation section. And by that I mean, how did the author support or fail to support the main points? A good book of this type, if you're looking for a good one, look for a book that has a decent bibliography or list of references at the back of the book. I would shy away from any book that comes across as, it's just all the author's opinion, and the author's not backing up what they are saying with research studies and things like that. For example, I've banned the book Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. The author has a mail-order doctorate from somewhere in Canada that has since been shut down. It's all just his opinion. He's laughing all the way to the bank. You could read a book like that for entertainment, but not for a course like this. On the other hand, if you wanted to read a good book about the way men think or women think, read The Male Brain by Lou Anne Brisendine, or The Female Brain by Lou Anne Brisendine. She's a professor of psychiatry, I want to say at Stanford. And half the book is a list of references. It's not just her opinion. So, if you're reading a developmental psychology book, look for something like that. There's some suggestions in the course syllabus to consider when you're looking for a book of this type. That the author should be qualified. The book should be based on sound scientific theory. It should not promise the impossible. There's a book out there called Toilet Training in Less Than a Day. You really think that's possible? And so on. So I'd like to know by the day of the first test what book you're reading. And again, that's February the 10th. Although it'd be to your advantage to let me know way before then. I have to approve the title. And the reason for that is I won't approve any title that I don't think will get you a good grade. And then everybody in the class has to read a different book. So, you know, we don't have 5 people all reading the same biography or something. So if there's maybe you lucked out and you read something like this over the winter break, but shoot me an email, say, hey, will this book work or whatever, and then I'll let you know if somebody else already has it or not. I'll post a list periodically on Blackboard in terms of what books are already taken. And so I would get going on this assignment early on. The actual report isn't due until April the 5th. So, but I'd like to know by the day of the first test that you've selected a book and you're reading it. At least let me be under the illusion that that's what's happening. I'm decided to have office hours on Thursday evenings from 7 until 8 o'clock at night on Blackboard Collaborate Ultra. So this is a time when I'll be available if you have any questions you want to ask or run ideas by me or just chat, that I'll be available to meet with students. Or you can also request an appointment, and we'll figure out a time when we both can get together on Blackboard Collaborate Ultra. And you can always email me questions and concerns and that sort of thing. As far as course grades are concerned, if you look at the bottom of page 3, scores between 90 and 100 are an A, 80 to 89 a B, 70 to 79 a C, 60 to 69 a D, and less than 60 would be failing. And your grade in the course will be an average of your scores on the 4 tests plus the book review. So the book review counts the same as a test. So if your test average is a little lower than you wish, book report's a great way to bring it up. There's no reason not to make a perfect score on a book report. And by the way, at the end of the year, you know, if you ended up with an 89.2, well, you can rest assured I'm going to round that up to a 90 and you'll get an A. There's nothing more frustrating than getting that close. But if you ended up with 88.6, you're out of luck. But anything almost there, I will round up. Let's see. Let's mention other things on page 3, like academic integrity and things like that. You know, this hasn't ever been a major problem with me, but every once in a while I've encountered a student who bought a book report online or something like that. I remember years ago. It's usually always a dead giveaway when it's not in the right format. And I remember there was a student one time handed in his book report. I could tell that he didn't write it. I called him into my office. I said, "You didn't write this report." He went, "Oh yeah, I did." "No, you didn't." "Oh, honest to goodness, I wrote it." I said, "Well, I got my computer on. Let me show you where I found it online." He said, "Okay, I admit it. I didn't write it." I said, "How much do you pay for this report?" He said, $30. I said, "Well, it's not even a good report. It's like a C report. For $30, you could have at least bought you an A report. And now that I know you didn't write it, it's an F report. Please don't do anything so foolish." Or plagiarism, copying other people's stuff. You can copy other people's ideas to your heart's content as long as you give them credit for it. Or collusion. You can't get together with another student in the class and take the exams together. That doesn't work. So I don't need to harp on all this stuff. It's rare that I've had problems with people cheating in class, but every once in a while I've run into somebody that does that. So consider yourself warned. On the bottom of page 2, we get into my teaching philosophy. Above all else, have fun. I feel like if I'm not having fun, no one else is. So I like to have a good time in the material that we're studying. I like to infuse lectures with real-life examples of psychology and practice. I don't ever just make up examples. It's much harder online to involve students in live demonstrations like I can do in class. But what I do offer online is a discussion board on Blackboard where you can post, I'll pose a question or something. You can throw out your 2 cents worth and give your opinion on things and so on. Those aren't included in grading. I don't have any idea how you would grade comments to questions. I would like to think that it's just intellectually stimulating to become involved in discussions about material and share your ideas with other students. There are some people that are just quiet and they don't like to do that. Again, I maximize use of media in my teaching. As I mentioned before, there's video clips, there's audio clips, there's PowerPoint slides, there's audio lectures, etc., etc. It's not just all the same thing. I love a good debate. And boy, there are lots of things that you can debate in a course like this. And a good debater can take any side of an issue and argue it. Really big issues don't have clear-cut answers. I love a good debate. I'm good at being the devil's advocate. I might make you really angry expressing my point of view when in fact I totally agree with you. But there's another side to everything. I mentioned here in the syllabus that debates assume an environment of academic freedom. People have differing viewpoints, and it's expected that you respect the views of other people. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them. I can remember one semester I was teaching this course at the Rio Grande campus, and we were having a debate over abortion. And there were two ladies in the class, probably I think they were both in their 30s. And they got so angry at each other, they were practically throwing paper wads at each other. One being for it and one being against it. By the time class was over, they left the room yelling at each other. You know what happened? They became the best of friends. They started studying together outside of class. They were inseparable. And they were both very different from each other, but they said, by the end of the semester, they were like, I don't agree with her point of view, but I totally understand it. An honorable goal of higher education is to develop what we call post-formal thought, which recognizes that your own perspective is only one of many potentially valid views, and that life entails many inconsistencies. It also promotes dialectical thinking, and dialectical thinking involves considering both sides of an issue simultaneously and then forging them into a synthesis of the original idea and its opposite. We'll study this more in depth when we get to the stage of life that you're in right now. I say you're in right now, assuming that a lot of you are in the emerging or adulthood stages of life. But another part of my teaching philosophy is to make the material relevant to your vocational and personal aspirations, and to especially identify how psychology permeates virtually every aspect of our lives. One of the first things that I want you to do once you've completed this orientation video is to write me an email and tell me about yourself. I may have mentioned this at the beginning, but I'm going to repeat it so you don't forget. Send me an email soon. This is how, one of the things I've got to do as a professor is certify that you're attending class. And this is one of the best ways I can think of doing it is write me an email and tell me where you grew up. I know a lot of you didn't necessarily grow up in the Austin area. What's your background? What's your major? What's your career goal? Tell me something interesting about yourself. Something that'll help me get to know you as a person. And then I'll respond to each of those emails, and having been enlightened. Typically, the class is very diverse, full of fascinating folks, and I'm looking forward to getting to know more of you in the near future.